urgency mixed with quiet surrender. Power no longer spoke from a place of command, but from the fear of being left behind. The executive broke the silence with words that cut through every remaining illusion. Their window was closing. If they didn't act now, they would become irrelevant the moment your recognition reached its natural weight. Association was no longer a choice. It was survival. Competition was dismissed without debate. You were no longer someone to outrun. You were someone they needed access to before your circle sealed itself. The financial projections followed, precise and unforgiving. If you continued on your current path without adopting calculated tactics, within 18 months you would hold influence it had taken them decades to manufacture, not through force, not through leverage, but through something they no longer possessed. 18 months, not a lifetime, not a slow climb, a compression of time that exposed how fragile their achievements truly were. Influence rooted in truth moves faster than influence built on compromise. They knew they couldn't reproduce it, because it was grounded in integrity they had traded away long ago. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Then the question surfaced, trembling beneath the numbers. What if you chose to awaken fully? If these outcomes were unfolding while you moved without conscious acceleration, what would happen if you stepped into your awareness with intention? No one answered. Silence carried the truth they didn't want to voice. If you aligned deliberately with what you already carry, there would be no field where imitation could keep up. The strategist laid out the remaining paths. If you continued naturally, your rise was unavoidable, and they would fade within 2 years. If they attempted interference, it would only expose them further, turning resistance into proof of the contrast between truth and fabrication. The final option was association now, while relevance could still be preserved. It was the only scenario that offered them a future. And yet even that option felt hollow, because it required something they could not guarantee, that you would see value in what they had to offer. They knew the imbalance. You already possessed what mattered. Authenticity, integrity, real connection, a life that draws success without chasing it. What currency could they place on the table that you didn't already hold? That realization pressed them into the most revealing territory of all. To assess your character, they had to do something none of them had practiced in years: tell the truth about themselves. The creative voice spoke first, raw and unguarded. 15 years ago, they had abandoned their integrity in exchange for visibility. Every day since had been spent justifying that choice. But your existence dismantled the lie they lived by. You were succeeding without sacrificing essence, and that meant the betrayal had never been necessary. It wasn't fate, it was fear. What shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? That confession opened the flood. The executive followed, admitting to calculated losses of friendship, people discarded because they offered no strategic advantage. And yet you maintained genuine bonds without measuring return, and those very relationships were amplifying your influence beyond anything manipulation had produced. Humanity, it turned out, generated more power than strategy ever had. The financial voice cracked next. 2 decades spent optimizing life for output, trimming away joy, connection, anything that didn't multiply wealth. And yet your life, balanced and generous, appeared fuller, richer, more alive. Money had been won, life had been lost. Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues without right. Then the youngest spoke, and the room fell still. They had never known who they were without performance. Born into constant visibility, identity had been shaped by approval before self-awareness ever formed. Seeing someone genuine didn't inspire them, it terrified them, because there was no true self to return to. Your presence forced each of them to face what they had surrendered on the altar of ambition. Your integrity exposed the stories they told themselves to survive compromise. But the most devastating truth wasn't simply that you were authentic. It was that you were prospering because of it. That single fact demolished the central justification of their lives. The belief that integrity must be sacrificed for real success. You proved it was a lie. And if it was a lie, then the years of betrayal, the erosion of self, the quiet shame they carried, had all been unnecessary. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." After the confessions, the room fell quiet again. And for the first time, power understood that it was no longer setting the direction. It was reacting to it. What they designed next was both the highest acknowledgement and the clearest confession that you hold real power. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that cannot be dismissed. The executive named it without disguise. They could not neutralize you using familiar methods, because you operate from a frequency outside their reach. That left only two paths. Either they rise toward truth themselves, or they accept becoming irrelevant. To rise meant something far more unsettling than strategy. It meant becoming less false. The creative voice hesitated, then spoke a thought that once would have sounded ridiculous. What if they tried to be authentic, not as an image, not as a tactic, but for real? Coming from someone whose career had been carefully constructed, the admission landed with weight. Your presence had stirred something unexpected in people long trained to suppress it. A genuine desire to recover integrity they had buried years ago. This is real power, not the power to control others, but the power to awaken them, power that doesn't demand attention, yet transforms rooms simply by standing whole. The kingdom of God is not in word, but in power. Not declared, demonstrated. The strategist proposed what he called a progression toward authenticity, slowly removing masks, allowing vulnerability to surface, modeling their steps after the way you live without effort. It was no longer about studying markets or influence. They were studying you. Then came the most revealing decision of all. When they discussed how to approach you, agreement formed quickly. No transactions, no leverage, no offers dressed as generosity. Instead, they would ask you for help. Not professional help, personal help. Each one named an area where they had lost themselves and believed you carried something they could not manufacture. They would come without posture, without authority, admitting they no longer knew who they were beneath performance. It was strategy, yes, but it was also real need, because beneath their influence sat confusion, and they believed you held clarity. The executive summarized it simply: if they wanted connection, it could not come from power. It had to come from humility, because power, as they had learned, does not impress you. Authenticity does. So don't be surprised when people appear differently than before. When confidence gives way to honesty, when authority softens into exposure, the vulnerability will be real, even if the approach feels complex. Powerful people who never asked for help are preparing to ask you, because they finally see that unwavering integrity carries more weight than every title they possess. Yet the most unsettling realization came next. They turned their attention to something you weren't even aware you were doing: your effect on people you've never met. The financial analysis revealed patterns that refused to be explained away. Communities exposed to your presence showed consistent change. More kindness, less drama, healthier relationships. Not because you taught techniques, but because you existed visibly as yourself. Within weeks, behavior shifted. Not inspiration as a feeling, but transformation as action. By their fruits ye shall know them. The evidence was not emotional, it was measurable. People spoke of finding courage to have conversations they had avoided for years. Others admitted realizing their lives no longer matched who they truly were. Creators began reshaping their voices, not copying you, but uncovering themselves. Authenticity was spreading, not by instruction, but by contact. A chain reaction, one person becoming real, giving permission for another to do the same. This was not a movement you announced. It was a movement that happened because truth cannot stay contained. An accidental revolution, and the most powerful revolutions are never planned. They begin when someone refuses to fracture themselves to fit the world. The youngest named it plainly: you were not trying to lead anything. You weren't calling followers, and that was what made it unstoppable. Integrity was doing the work on its own. Then the question surfaced that silenced the room. What happens when you realize the power you already carry? If this much change unfolds without intention, what becomes possible when awareness joins alignment? No one answered, because the answer was too large to say out loud. Fully awake, you wouldn't just influence culture, you would redefine it. You would set standards others could not ignore. And long after this moment passes, your name would still be spoken, not because you sought legacy, but because truth leaves marks time cannot erase. That was when the conversation shifted again, and how they truly see you was finally about to be spoken. Then a question surfaced that none of them wanted to speak, yet all of them felt. What if someone outside this room decides you are too disruptive to be allowed to continue? The silence that followed wasn't doubt, it was recognition. When real influence begins to rise, there are always those willing to protect their interests through shadows. Smear campaigns dressed as concern, sabotage framed as professionalism, quiet attacks meant to exhaust rather than confront. The executive broke the stillness with a sentence no one expected. They needed to protect you. It startled the room. Protect you? You had been framed as a rival, a destabilizing force. Why would they shield what once threatened them? The answer came stripped of pretense. Because if you were destroyed before reaching your fullness, they would lose the only living proof they had that authenticity actually works. And without that proof, they would retreat back into the lie that compromise is inevitable. Worse than that, the world would lose a catalyst it desperately needs. Your life had crossed an invisible threshold. You were no longer just a person, you were evidence. The creative voice followed, steady but urgent. If something happened to you, they would all return to excusing their own betrayals. They would tell themselves, sincerity is naive, integrity impractical. You couldn't be allowed to fall, not because of competition, but because you carried hope that change is still possible. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. What was happening was unmistakable. Those who once measured themselves against you now measured themselves by you. Your authenticity had become a reference point, a living reminder of what they abandoned and what they might still recover. The strategist outlined a plan, quiet, precise, effective. Each of them had reach in different sectors. Together, they could monitor for coordinated attacks and intervene before false narratives gained momentum. A protective web, unseen, unnamed. You wouldn't even know it existed. The financial one added weight to the promise. Any attempt at professional sabotage would meet real consequences, making an attack on you expensive enough to discourage repetition. The youngest offered their own shield. If misinformation surfaced, they could mobilize attention instantly, exposing deception before it rooted itself. Not to glorify you, but to defend truth. They were committing themselves as guardians, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because your existence had become too valuable to lose. The executive made it final. Anyone who tried to destroy you would face them all, even if that meant opposing their own circles. That was the level of respect you had awakened without ever demanding it. But the meeting didn't stop at protection. It turned inward. The executive proposed a pact, not a contract, a vow among themselves. Each would begin the journey back to authenticity and support the others through it. He admitted openly that he didn't know how to recover what he had lost and needed help. That admission alone would have been unthinkable months earlier. The creative accepted first, suggesting regular meetings with no performance, no branding, only honest sharing of where integrity was hard and where it was returning. The strategist added a harder rule. If anyone slipped back into falsehood, the others had permission to call it out directly. No politeness, no protection of image. Iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. One by one, they agreed. What formed was something rare, a circle of powerful people committing not to expansion, but to restoration. And you were the spark that made it possible. Then came promises, each one costly. The executive vowed to publicly acknowledge an unethical decision made years earlier, not because law required it, but because conscience did. Reputation would suffer, but integrity would begin to breathe again. The creative committed to releasing a long-hidden project, one they had buried because it wasn't commercially safe. Choosing truth over profit, risking relevance to reclaim voice. The strategist pledged to turn away clients who wanted manufactured authenticity and rebuild his work around helping people uncover what is real, a complete inversion of his income model. The financial one promised to give generously to causes that actually mattered to them, without benefit, without visibility. Anonymous. Because generosity only heals when it's not performance. The youngest made the hardest vow of all, to step away from platforms entirely for months, to find out who they were without metrics deciding their worth, to return only if authenticity could lead. These were not emotional statements. They were decisions with consequences, and every one of them traced back to you. The pact ended with one final clause. If you ever asked for help, they would respond immediately, no matter the cost. Because you had given them something they could not buy, proof that transformation is possible. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. When the meeting ended hours later,